Happy Friday, everyone. And my name is Igor. I will be your host today. I am joined by my co-host, David Desormier. He will be um, um, helping me facilitate, watch the chat, and share slides. Today's session, the title is Teaching Online Adult Learners, Challenges and Opportunities. But before we get to that, I just want to say thank you for being here. Our team is always ready to help whenever you have any need related to instructional design. We have a team of instructional designers, multimedia specialists, and graphic designers. And so if you have any needs related to course design, um, video production, feel free to reach out to us. We will always be here to help. A few announcements. We have a new initiative, book club, that's launching next month. Jason Johnston, do you have a few words to say about the book club?
Yeah, this is our first ever digital learning book club, and we're going to be looking at this open source book about critical digital pedagogies. And so looking at issues of inclusion and access and how we can use our digital strength and resources, but at the same time continue to be human and humane in how we do that. So I'll put the link into the chat if you're interested in that and signing up. There's no obligation to come to any of the meetings, or we're going to have a asynchronous connection in Inscribe, as well as 5 synchronous meetings that will be more of a conversation book club kind of thing. And people can come and go as they wish, but it'd be great to have you.
Thanks, Jason. And Jason mentioned earlier, Inscribe, and that's the next item there, new UTK virtual learning space. It's a virtual learning space. I'm going to share the link in the chat. If you are affiliated with UTK, you can join that community. So what it is intended for is to allow you to ask any questions after the brown bag. Say you have questions, follow-up questions that you want to that were not answered during the session, you can post your question there. And also an opportunity for you to ask us any questions. Say you have questions about your course, you're not sure where to go. You post your question, your concern there. We'll make sure that if we cannot answer your question, we'll find you the right person. We have colleagues from OIT who are also part of that community, so they have been very active in Inscribe. And the last announcement is our online learning community of practice. The first one of this semester is on February 6th, and we'll be sharing the link in the chat. And if you're interested in joining us, feel free to register. And now I would like to invite my colleague, David Desormier, to introduce our guest speakers today. David?
Great. Thank you, Igor. All right. Well, thank you so much for our guest speakers today. What I'd like to do is just briefly just kind of do a bio here. This is Dr. Marianne, and I'm not sure how you pronounce your last name, Dr. Marianne. Would you mind pronouncing it for us in the chat or in here? Breinig, great. Marianne's a professor of physics at UTK, teaches undergraduate and graduate level courses, develops teaching materials for online and hybrid courses. She is very interested in new modes of content delivery. Marianne received the 2016 College of Arts and Sciences James R. and Nell W. Cunningham Outstanding Teacher Award, the 2017 University Libraries Open Education Trailblazer Award, and the 2019 L.R. Hessler Award for Excellence in Teaching and Service. Welcome, Marianne. And then we have our Dr. Reed Scull. He has been a university administrator and most recently a faculty member in the Higher Education Administration, HIED program at the University of Wyoming. This online asynchronous program focuses on preparation for academic and administration professionals, as well as faculty and administration. A master's degree, certificate in community college leadership, and a doctoral program are part of this program. Reed teaches HIED online courses in higher education systems and continuing professional development. He has several publications in journals such as the Community College Journal of Research and Practice, His doctorate is in higher education administration from the University of Arizona in Tucson, and his postdoctoral work includes study in adult and continuing education at the University of Victoria of British Columbia. So Reed, welcome. And then we have Dr. Mitsunori Misawa, is an associate professor and associate department head in the Department of Ed Leadership and Policy Studies at UT Knoxville. Dr. Misawa's major areas of interest center on social justice and encompass the intersectionality of race, gender, and sexual orientation, academic and workplace bullying, transformative learning, policy, leadership studies, program evaluation, HR and organizational development, and research methodologies in social sciences. Dr. Misawa authored numerous publications on academic bullying and social justice. Most recently, he edited a handbook, the Paul Grave Handbook on Learning for Transformation. His scholarship has been widely published and is well recognized by national and international scholarly communities. So what we'll do first is we're going to have Marianne just quickly introduce herself, and then we'll get started with the presentation. Marianne.
Hi, I'm a professor of physics, and I'm an old hand teaching asynchronous online courses.
Great, thanks, Marianne. All right, I'll go ahead and share the. Great. All right.
If I may, before Marianne gets started, I wanted to say that this session is being recorded and will be available on our website next week. And if you would, participants, please use the chat to introduce yourself, who you are, and where you are, what department you're from, and what class you teach. Thank you. Marianne.
So can we go to the first slide? So thinking about adult learners, nearly all of our students at the university are adults. So when we're talking about adult learners, whom are we actually talking about? And I think that when we talk about adult learners, they fall into a category of non-traditional students. They take college classes a relatively long time after they have finished high school. And they usually are employed, they work full-time, they may or probably do have dependents, and they're financially independent. They pay for their own education, not their parents paying for their education. And they have various reasons for re-entering or entering college. One of the reasons is opportunities for advancements or for better pay in their current job. Maybe they need a certificate. Maybe they need a particular course, and it will give them a better opportunity or a raise in pay. Another very common reason is they have started a degree as a traditional student, but not completed it and now want to complete it. They want to stay competitive professionally because maybe the area that they are working in is advancing rapidly and they feel they need some help staying competitive. And also very common is career change. They want to go from an initial career to a different career, and they need to have some additional credentials to be able to do this. And then there's probably a lot of other reasons why they would re-enter college. So the question then is, how can we as educators best serve these adult learners? And I don't think there is a single technique that accommodates all adult learners. There are so many different programs and courses, and the requirements for these are significantly different. But it's usually said that most adult learners prefer asynchronous online courses that can be worked into their busy schedule. That is particularly true if they don't live in a town where there is a college or a university that they could attend in person. If they have the opportunity to attend in person, I have from personal experience met many people who actually prefer coming to the university, but for many it's just impossible. So I think what all asynchronous courses for adult learners and probably all learners should have, and I made a list there, they definitely should have clearly defined goals and objectives. Students that register for this course need to know what they are registering for. In particular, adult learners. Does it really serve the purpose that they have for going back to the university? Then the course should have a schedule, and I'm going to explain very well with deadlines. What has to be accomplished by what date? And both the students and the instructors have to stick to this schedule because adult learners have to be able to plan ahead. There should be enough lead time to make it possible to stick to the schedule and submit all work on time. So you can plan ahead, and if unexpected things happen, you don't fall back. You have enough time to submit your work. You can start it early and so on. Then I think it's very, very important to have practice assignments for students to check their understanding. Without this feedback to them, they really don't know where they stand in the course. And I want to also provide, and I think that's important, feedback from a live instructor, not just from a computer. So if they have questions, if the answer that they get from like a program isn't good enough, the live instructor has to be able to jump in and give feedback to the students. And I think they should have a way to communicate with their fellow students, because that's how they get a lot of feedback, and students explain things to each other, and the best way to learn is to explain it to somebody else. Can we go to next? Why am I so set on having deadlines? Well, I have been teaching asynchronous online courses for a very long time. From 2003 to 2010, I taught an introductory physics course in an online program at UTK. That was a program that allowed non-UTK students to enroll anytime from anywhere. There was no other requirement, as you have to finish it in about a year. And the students that were enrolled were mostly adult learners. And the course had the same structure as the course I'm teaching now, but no deadlines, because it was specifically anytime, anywhere. And the students who finished the course usually did quite well and gave very positive feedback. But many students never finished the course. I think about half the students never finished the course. They worked through it, maybe half of it, maybe even 3/4 of it, and then nothing. They just did not continue. Now, non-UTK students have to enroll together with traditional students in a semester-long course with deadlines. And of all the adult learners that have been enrolled, and there are quite a few, if they have been enrolled after the second week drop deadline, all have finished the course. So I think at least for a linear science course, where module 2 is following module 1 is required to understand module 2, and so on, that it is very important that you have a schedule with many spaced deadlines for retrieval practice, and that is an important part of the course design. As far as technology literacy, I have not had many problems with students having problems with the technology. I think it's important to clearly state what technology use is expected before the class even starts. For example, you need a computer with a webcam. If you need it, it just depends. You might need Chrome or another Chromium-based browser for things like Proctoria or so. You might need a Zoom client. Whatever it is, make sure that it's stated before the class starts so people know exactly what they're getting into. If possible, use technology that's integrated with Canvas. That gives the least amount of problems if it's really has good integration with Canvas. And if you require software provided by UTK. And then provide detailed instructions of how to use the technology and the software, and either produce instructional videos of how to use it or link to instructional videos of how to use it so that students can go through it step by step and feel comfortable about it. As far as motivation and engagement, I think it's really important, and that's why I went in the beginning. You have to tell the students what the course is about, what they will learn, and you have to know why the students are taking your course. And then make sure the course provides what they are taking the course for, or tell them it doesn't. That's also important. If they expect something different, then that's probably not a good match. As far as engagement, I think it's important to make engagement with the instructor and the fellow students mandatory. Most students initially would skip it if it's not mandatory. But if it's mandatory and they have to engage, then they kind of see the value in it after a few iterations, and then they really start enjoying it. But if you don't make it mandatory, I've seen, then there's very little participation in engagements with instructor and fellow students. Only a few students will do it. And I also think it's important to avoid unnecessary rules for engagements. If students are in a classroom setting, they can talk to the instructor and they can talk to other students about any class-related topics. They don't have to first do this and then do this and then do this. If they have a question, if they have a comment, they can get into a conversation with either their fellow students or the instructors. And I think that should be also the case for online students, that there are no hurdles to the engagement. That's kind of my take on the points that were raised in the beginning.
Great. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you so much. All right, next up, we'll have Reed Scull. And Reed, if you wouldn't mind just saying hi really quick.
Hello, Reed Scull here, and it's a daunting task to follow Dr. Breinig, and I really could just finish up by saying yes, like she said, and then I'd sound a lot smarter. But since I've been invited here to speak, I'll be the thorn amongst two roses here. We have some outstanding faculty that I'm able to talk with and join in the discussion, and I'm honored, and I thank Igor and David for inviting me to this. Just to, I'll give you briefly my researcher positionality statement. I study higher education administration, and I really strongly believe that higher education in many ways is in a crisis and is finding it's a struggle for us to sustain ourselves. And I think I struggle a lot with my teaching and keeping it current pedagogically. And so I have to reflect and take responsibility for my vision of teaching and learning, and understand pedagogy, and understand how what my institution is purposed to do, and who my students are, and what the possibilities are for the future. So I'm in a constant state of struggle, thinking about how I can do differently and maybe better. And so I think we do have to really recognize, I think what Dr. Breinig said about adult learners is just so apropos for what we do. About 75% of all higher education students in America are or could be classified non-traditional. And part of this is the adult learner. They're adults. They're older than students used to be. And so this kind of comes to the point that our adult learners have a different station in life. I'm quoting a community college studies professor, George B. Vaughn, by using this terminology, but he said in the 80s, adult learners are situated in a combination of work, family, and learning demands, and the demands shift and change in importance frequently, and learners are constantly trying to take a triage approach to meeting all of these competing demands. And so when I interact with my students, I try to remember that and try to be flexible. I do agree with Dr. Breinig. You have to be clear about deadlines. If somebody misses a deadline, what I ask them is, what would you do to be fair to the others that made the deadline? And you'd be surprised how that shuts down a lot of late turn-ins. But sometimes students will come forward and say, look, I need to have a penalty or a deduction so that I'm fair to my colleagues. I don't even have to, you know, a lot of times I have to say, wait a minute, that's a little bit severe. But that's the technique I use to kind of encourage students to be cognizant of deadlines, and I do try to be very clear. Could I get the next slide? And yeah, thanks, David. So common challenges, I think adults are juggling work, family, hobbies, and their time and attention is divided. They have scheduling challenges. So do traditional learners. I think even children have scheduling challenges. But in the case of adult learners, it's less negotiable. Sometimes they're faced with the choice of, you know, taking care of their kids because they're sick, or coming to class, or doing their work. And so they find themselves between a rock and a hard place, if you will. Sorry to speak in idioms, but you know, that's a frequent position that they're in. But they bring a lot of assets, and I try to remind these students about that. And they have many of them have wonderful work experience and prior knowledge of what actually goes on in a university. You know, I teach higher ed administration. Most of my students are community college professors, administrators, university administrators and professors. They want to get a doctorate or a certificate, and they know a lot. And yeah, I think I know some, but I try to recognize that they come to the table with knowledge and experiences that they can share and leverage for everybody's learning. David, could I get the next slide there? Thanks. And so, you know, in tailoring my teaching methodologies to adult learners, I try to think of, you know, clarity of representation of the information that I provide. And sometimes I use what I think relates to UD, or universal design, and I try to be careful about indentations and typesettings and capitalization and, you know, levels of headings. And I try to be consistent, just in case that would be helpful. I think it's helpful to all learners, but learners with intellectual disabilities or different intellectual skills, I think need that kind of support. So I try to do that, and anybody's willing to challenge me on that if I'm off in this. But I try to use multiple modes of assessment. Not all students learn, and not all students express themselves in the same ways. So I do emphasize writing because I tell them this is graduate school and writing is the currency of what we do. So I do have at least 2 writing assignments over the course of the semester, whether it's a master's or doctoral level course. But I also have discussions that I watch, monitor, and grade. I also have guest speakers that I ask students to bring in. I have students do e-portfolios and case studies that help them. So there's some students that really enjoy applying what they know to real life situations. And so some of our students are really great at that, and they excel on those case studies. Some don't. But I always try to work it out so that they're different kinds of assessments and different kinds of pedagogies and opportunities, so that in my mind anyway, everybody has a chance to learn and express themselves their way. That's very important to me. I think another thing that's an important job skill that I see lacking in many graduate students even is the ability to master the soft skills of collegiality and collaboration and teamwork. And so I don't force students to do co-writing, but I offer that as an option to students, and I give them some instructions for how they do it. And it's pretty much the same that I would do if I was writing a journal article with Dr. Breinig, and I'd have a discussion. Here's what I see as my responsibility, and here's what I see as yours. How can we negotiate that so that we have clarity and agreement on how you work together, in the interests of learning? So I do that. That's one thing that I try to do. So maybe we go to the next slide. I'm afraid that I'm going on too long. So David, just go like this. I'm a professor and you've given me a forum. What can I say? I'm going to run over. But, I think asynchronous is really important because of the scheduling dilemma. And students, the downside to it is students tell me, I don't have a sense of community. I don't feel as personal. And I acknowledge that. It's harder when we don't get together as a group, but many times I'll have optional synchronous meetings at different times of the day and different times of the week. This gives my wife the fits, but I tell people, look, I'll have classes, I'll have synchronous meetings in the evening, or I'll have an optional Saturday morning coffee show in the morning, and I just sit there with my cup of coffee and see who comes in to chat with me. And, so I try to address this, I wouldn't say it's a beef that students have, but they're customers in many ways today. It's not like when I was a student way back in 1983, where we just sat and worshiped professors and listened and took notes. This is a different era, and they feel free to tell me what I need to do better, and I relish that. Quite frankly, I consider it free consulting services. And so I listen to them, and I'm mindful of this problem of community that comes when you don't get together at the same time in the same place. And then, I just make it, I have to make teaching a priority. And I would imagine my much more accomplished colleagues, Dr. Misawa and Dr. Breinig, they have heavy research, service, and advising responsibilities, and I do too. It's probably less, but I've got to crank out a couple of articles a year. I've got to go to national conferences. I advise 65 graduate students, and I try to tell my students, look, I just don't show up for class. When you don't see me, I'm pretty busy. So it may take me 24 hours to get back to you. But what I do is I make time for teaching because it is my priority, and I really believe it's my raison d'etre, if you will, my reason for being. I don't know how you justify being a professor if you don't care about teaching and learning. So I am in those classes. I really believe in the concept of instructor presence, and I'm in those classes 4 to 5 days during the week, and over the weekend, I take Sundays off for grading. And that's what I tell students. I'm not going to be in a class on Sunday. I'm grading your stuff. So, and they know that, and they don't mind. But our students are working, and sometimes they're working on the classes at 2 a.m. in the morning. And so it's a different kind of mindset, and how it forces us to consider our commitments to teaching and learning activity. And I think that may be my last slide, but hopefully for you all, that's my last slide. No, technology literacy. I agree with everything that Dr. Breinig brought up about this issue, but I'm really concerned with information literacy, which I think is wound up into data literacy. Data literacy is a closely related topic, and it's all about how you visualize and receive information and what the quality of the information is that you're getting. And I absolutely insist that every class I teach has a information literacy and libraries week. And it's actually in 2 of my 3 classes that I'm teaching this semester. This is information literacy and libraries week. And the librarian, the digital librarian at our university, helped me set up a module, for discussion and readings and selected readings. And she comes in and makes comments. And obviously I like to make comments, so I go in and I make comments, and the students generally engage pretty well. I do have clear expectations. I want students in there commenting and engaging and reading, but they outstrip my expectations in the main. And I think they appreciate having interaction and contact with a librarian. And I think that's critical in graduate school. Our students are doing literature reviews and dissertations, so it's important. And then motivation and engagement. I'm trying to get away from teaching. I'm just going to tell you right off. I'm trying to get into facilitating. And so that I'm really horrible this way. You give me a forum and I could talk for hours. I could go another hour today, believe it or not. So I try to make them the people who talk and produce knowledge. And I provide guardrails and what my expectations are, and they seldom fail me. They are graduate students, they're advanced students, experienced students, but I find when I put them at the center, they don't fail. They know they're on, and the pressure of that brings forth the best in them. That's my belief. I talked a little bit about co-writing, and I talked about my ideas regarding facilitation, but I do tell students, and I think this is important, is that we all teach, whether we're in a classroom or we answer the phones or we're a janitor that cleans the floors at night. we all have the capacity to either directly or indirectly impact the teaching and learning process. And so I tell students, I'm going to ask you to facilitate discussions 1 week in the semester. And a lot of our students don't have that experience in the classroom face to face with students. And so I make sure they get that experience. And sometimes when I write letters of reference, I'll tell potential employers, look, this student facilitated in my higher education systems class and did a great job. Here's how it was great, yada, yada, yada. And so I try to require students being in charge, actually in charge of facilitation. And if I wasn't going on so long, I'd tell you exactly how I do that, but I'm going to spare you and give it over to Professor Misawa. Thanks for your time and attention, and I'll mute myself now.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Reed. All right, Dr. Misawa, go ahead and introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll show your presentation.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Misawa. I'm a currently associate professor in adult and continuing education, and also I'm an associate departmental head of the Department of Leadership and Policy Studies at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. So before I go into this slide, I just want to say something about distance education. So distance education has been evolving, continuously evolving, I think. I started teaching in higher education in early 2000s. And one of my first courses was a distance education that back then we called as a corresponding education. So back then, not so many programs in higher education used online platforms because they were interested in doing more traditional way. But I have seen the evolution in a different phases. So, and I also have taught in a various contexts in higher education, both undergraduate and graduate levels. And mainly at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, I teach PhD courses in adult and continuing education. And sometimes I train professionals at the workplace as well. And I used both asynchronous and synchronous and also hybrid format. Currently, I'm teaching in a master's degree program called EdPsych Online. We use synchronous online instruction using Zoom. So we meet every week like this. And then I'm teaching adult and continuing education PhD program. And we used to be synchronous, but now we are using hybrid, kind of blended both asynchronous and synchronous instructions. And each approach or format has its own characteristics and audiences. And we cannot say that online teaching and learning are one fits all, right? It depends on the audience, depends on the level of the students. We have to utilize more different types of teaching methods. So I listed several characteristics of adult learners. So those are based on the literature in adult education and also my own experiences. For example, everybody here is adult, I assume. So I assume that you have prior knowledge and life experiences. And the life experiences can be a great learning resources for not only learners, but also instructors. So we really encourage our instructor to kind of appreciate adults' life experiences. And then also, all of us has some sort of positions in our society, like maybe in higher education setting at work, or maybe social cultural identity in a society. And all of us bring our positionality into the learning context. So that's probably why it's important for us to understand that how important our adult learners' experiences into our instruction. And then adults are mostly self-directed, I hope. They know what they want to know. They know what they want to learn. And then, mostly they are intrinsically motivated because they want to learn. Therefore, they are there, right? And then they, based on their prior knowledge and experiences, They want to see how the learning experiences or content's gonna apply to their own immediate situations. So they are more application oriented, and then they want to be more flexible, and also the online education components can be convenient for them. Earlier on, two presenters talked about, adults, non-traditional students, and then also they have full-time job. So they cannot come to class at certain day of the time, right? So flexibility and convenience are kind of important components of adult learners. And lastly, support and respect, because of their life experiences and also prior knowledge, they need to be acknowledged and respected. Can you go next? Yep. And some of the teaching methods that I use to connect with the diverse adult learners are 5 things. Again, application-oriented approaches. Each person has different life experiences, and each person has to think that they can apply what they learned in classroom into their workplace, right? Or maybe at their personal lives. So application-oriented approach is important. And I use, case studies. I use simulation, for example, and I use a teaching practicum for instructors in higher education to be able to practice teaching in class, for example. So application-oriented approach is important. And then also it's important for me to see the active learning, not passive learning. I want to see active learning using maybe dialogue, discussions, online, asynchronous online environment. I use discussion boards, as probably most people use that. And I use different types of software to kind of try to make sure that they're engaging that topic to each other. And then also they have to feel ownership, right? So active learning contains from planning of learning to implementation of learning to evaluation of the learning, right? So they're basically creating their own learning process. So they need to feel ownership. I think that is an important point. And then also it should be able to, like reflective practice, because they have to evaluate their own practice, right? So in order for to do that, then you need to be a reflective practice. So you need to kind of have a reflection into their own practice. And then self-directed learning. I think that's gonna make our students feel more ownership of the learning. So I use a learning contract with the students to see what they want to learn and how they want to learn, and then how they evaluate their learning. So I use that perspective to kind of foster, diverse population into our online environment. And lastly, recognition and value of learning. They need to know that whatever they're learning is valuable to them, right? Otherwise, they lose motivation. So continuously encouraging, this is important to you. This is how you can use it in your work or at, in your life, kind of stuff, to kind of emphasize that the value of learning. So some of the barriers are challenges, right, that the adult learners are facing. It can be situation barriers, or maybe it can be institution barriers, or it can be financial barriers, right? There are different types of barriers that they're kind of having to kind of experiencing, right? So time management. And then also I think time management and the work-life balance, I think they kind of come together, I think. Because adult learners often have multiple responsibilities and also personal commitments, right? In addition to that, they have to, they have to work and they have to come to class and so on. So balancing those things are kind of challenging for adults, including work and life balance, and sometimes boundaries. People have sometimes broad boundaries, and sometimes they are very broad, right? But it's important for distance educators to realize that setting boundaries are going to be important. Like, when you want to read the reading materials, and then when do you need to do the assignment in order for them to submit on time, for example. So boundary setting, it can be important. And also that can be difficult for the adult learners. And then technology literacy, right? Some adult learners may not be familiar with technology or online platforms, making it difficult for them to navigate the participate effectively. So that can be the technological barrier there too. And then self-discipline, right? Again, you have to be self-disciplined if you are in an asynchronous environment, I think. Synchronous environment, you have to be at certain time and certain place, right? And certain day. So it's kind of easier for them to kind of navigate. But yeah, asynchronous environment, they really have to structure their own schedule. And that's something I'll talk about in a moment. And then another barrier is going to be maybe engagement, right? They maybe have limited networking opportunities. Yeah. Can you go next? And then in my own online classroom environments, I use at least these three things. Previous presenters talked about those things, but I just emphasize the structure is very, very important, right? People need to be self-directed, and then they have to make their own schedule because everybody is different. Yeah. And then prioritizing. So what's the most important things they need to do, right? So I use course assignments and course readings in a syllabus to say this is the priority of this class, and then this is optional, for example, right? So they read from the top to bottom if they have time. And deadlines. I usually talk to my students in the first week of the semester, like this week. I already talked about those three things with my students. Deadlines. I try to map out the assignment deadlines using course outline or calendar. So I tell them, this is the due date, right? So in order for you to start writing, that you need to probably do maybe 10 days, maybe 12 days before in order for you to make deadlines. But for deadline wise, I can be flexible or accommodate because I have two deadlines like for one assignment. One is actual deadline and plus second one's grace period deadline. So as long as they meet, the grace period deadline, and I accept the assignment. And I always tell my students that, our lives as adults is so complex, right? Something happens suddenly, unexpectedly. So I understand that as long as they tell me before the deadline of the assignment that, something's going on, then I can be, flexible with them. I can work with them. That's something that, I kind of do that after the COVID pandemics. And the simple is best, I think, when we address the time management and work-life balance, I think, in asynchronous courses, for example, keep things simple, I think. But in order for us to do that, we have to provide them with guidelines and instructions. I always give them instructions on a typed, file, but also I give them a audio-visual perspective to kind of guide through them that this is what they need to do. And then also it's important for us to have a clear expectations. What are you expecting as an instructor? Well, what are you expecting from your instructor? And then what are you expecting from your students? So, and also what are you expecting from peers? So there are at least 3 expectation sections at the beginning of the semester in my class to do that. So we have like maybe classroom guideline and, expectations together, collaboration, I guess. Yeah. And then also it's important for asynchronous environment for us to, kind of think about is that sometimes adults are not skillful for technology, right? So that case, it's important for us to direct them to institutional technology support and assistance. And then also regular check-in is going to be very, very important. Maybe, once 2 weeks, maybe once 3 weeks, you may want to chat with maybe individually or maybe in a group, small group. I don't do entire group, do a regular check-in. I do kind of small groups so that, they feel more comfortable. Yes. And the motivation and engagement in online learning. I use andragogical approach because I'm an adult educator, and I believe that andragogy is an important component when we teach adults. So that case, you may want to use some application-oriented learning approach or self-directed learning approach, and then appreciate adult learners' life experiences. And then sometimes people ask me to give them critical feedback. When they do that, I do, right? But I tried not to do much because I want to make sure that they are going to develop their own scholarship. So I give them constructive and appreciative feedback. I think appreciation is probably important for adult learners. And then I do mindfulness and check-ins. So every semester, at the beginning of every class, I have some activity for mindfulness.
All right. I think that ends our presentation. Igor, do you want to take it away?
Sure, yeah, thank you, Reid, Dr. Misawa and Marianne. So I don't see any questions in the chat, but I took some notes, just have a few questions here, comments. Reid, you mentioned that you collaborate with the library, you use the library in your online courses, and your students seem to like it. And so I think we have a librarian from UTK here. I don't mean to put you on the spot. So if a UTK faculty were interested in having the library in their synchronous course, kind of to have a module on information literacy, is our library equipped to do that? Kind of, do you have dedicated staff for faculty who might want to do that? Well,
So I think that we have reference librarians for each college. And for my synchronous online classroom environment, I invite a reference librarian to my class to talk about library resources.
Okay. And Anna wanted to share something. Anna Sandeli?
Yeah, I can share a little bit too from the UT libraries. I'm head of our teaching and learning programs, and I'm not in a space where I can easily turn my camera on, but I would just echo that we do have librarians that are here for every college and major, online, in person. I'm going to put a few links in the chat as to how to reach out to librarians, and then also to our tutorials. So if you maybe would like to assign something that students could complete at their own pace, that's an option as well. And I think that will be especially helpful for adult learners. So I'll go ahead and put those in the chat now.
Thanks, Anna. Reid also mentioned that he assigns students to co-facilitate discussions. And I understand, Reid, you teach graduate level courses. And I'm curious to hear from other instructors here who are teaching undergraduate courses. Do you think you might be able to assign such activities or to have some activities in your undergraduate asynchronous courses and assigning students to moderate a discussion for a week? How do you think, do you think you might be able to have group work and assign students to moderate discussions?
I think, like everybody said, different techniques work for different classes. When you have a class that has 25 students in it or so, you can do totally different things than if you have a class that has 300 students in it. And so you have to adjust for what type of course you have, how you can do this. I think if I had a small class, that would be an ideal situation. But with a big class with 300 students, I'm already breaking it up into smaller discussion forums of about 100 students each, but then it pretty much works out itself. They form their interested topics, and certain students go to these topics and then they talk and maybe moderate, but assigning somebody is pretty much impossible.
Or assigning a discussion leader, a discussion moderator, is that what you?
Yeah, how do I pick one out of 300?
Okay. I think Reed had a strategy for that. Reed, how do you assign session leaders?
Well, yeah, my classes generally are right in the 15 to 25 students of a class, you know, and so it is a totally different ball game. But my colleagues that have undergraduate classes that are like at the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 levels, they have to think really creatively about how to manage that number of students. And I think you have to think creatively because a lot of students can fall through the cracks and sit in a corner, as it were, and never comment or never interact, just like in a regular classroom. So it puts a lot of pressure on the instructor to be kind of creative and mindful of this dynamic. And I think that's where teaching and learning excellence centers like your center, Igor, come in, is faculty with those large classes. They can talk to somebody who kind of understands those dynamics, and they're usually sitting in an office like yours. I think the more you can make an ally or a mentor out of folks at your teaching and learning center, the better positioned you are as a faculty member to make all kinds of learning opportunities the most effective possible. Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. My last question for Dr. Misawa, you mentioned that you use learning contracts. At what point of the course do you had them sign those contracts? At the beginning of the semester, midway, when I was?
Well, beginning of the semester, and then mid-semester, they have a midterm evaluation. And then towards the end of the semester, they have to do a final evaluation with artifact. So they'll have to submit the things that they have done throughout the semester.
Okay. Thank you. I see a few comments in the chat. Lisa Davenport shared she mentioned that the writing center also offers support for faculty. Is that right, Lisa?
That is correct, yes. And I try to provide my students the library tutorials, but also try to point them in the direction of the writing center because many students struggle with writing. And I really try to give constructive feedback, but if they could reach out to the writing center, then that sets them up for success.
Thank you, Lisa. This is helpful. Well, it looks like today we barely had any questions from the audience. I asked most of the questions. We have about, I think, 2 minutes left. Any last words, comments before we end the session? If not, once again, I wanted to thank Dr. Scull from the University of Wyoming, Dr. Misawa from UTK, and Dr. Breinig from UTK for leading this session. It was very informative. And thank you all for being here. We have our next brown bag in 2 weeks, and we'll be sending out more on our other offerings later next week. Thank you, and I hope you all have a great weekend. Thanks, David, and thank all.